This is Marat Kambolov, the new acting president of South Ossetia. Don't feel bad if you don't recognize him. Until just a few weeks ago, the people he is now president of wouldn't have recognized him either. He's a Russian citizen who moved to South Ossetia from Moscow in late May to take up a senior position in the civil service. And then, over the next few weeks, a series of suspiciously well-timed events happened in quick succession, suddenly catapulting Kambolov from an advisory role into the top executive job in this breakaway republic. He may be a newcomer, an immigrant no less, but Kambolov is not shy about exercising power in his new home. He's made surprise inspections, been shocked to discover corruption, and then taken personal responsibility to solve problems quickly. Honestly, if I was a normal citizen in South Ossetia, which has been ruled by highly corrupt, incompetent leaders for decades, I'd probably see Kambolov's arrival as a huge breath of fresh air. But for the last 30 years, the people of South Ossetia have always been allowed to choose their own leaders through highly flawed but competitive elections. Kambolov's arrival as a Kremlin-installed leader effectively ends this democratic tradition. What happens when the people of South Ossetia tire of his rule, as is bound to happen someday, and then discover, as they almost certainly will, he's not going anywhere? Kambolov's rapid ascent to power is also fueling speculation about Russia's future intentions in the region. Is his energetic presidency just a Kremlin-led cleanup of a notoriously kleptocratic puppet state? Or is it also a signal that Russia is preparing to formally annex South Ossetia, possibly sparking a Ukraine-style crisis in the Caucasus? Stay tuned, I'll explain. Hi everyone, I'm Fredo Rockwell, and I really wasn't planning to make another video about South Ossetia for quite a while, but so much has been happening in the last few weeks that I just had to make an update. For those of you who don't know, South Ossetia is one of two regions in the country of Georgia, which declared independence in the early 1990s at roughly the same time Georgia became independent from the Soviet Union. Until Russia's 2008 invasion of Georgia, Russia mostly ignored these two entities, but since then, it has been trying to exert more and more control over them. In Abkhazia, overt Russian interference has been met by fierce local resistance. In South Ossetia, which is much poorer and smaller in population terms than Abkhazia, and which is bordered by a Russian region populated by the same ethnic group, the Republic of North Ossetia, Russian meddling in local politics has been much less controversial. Up until a few months ago, Russia's unspoken agreement with South Ossetia has been this: we will bankroll your entire state in exchange for being able to put military bases on your territory, and while you get to have your own independent political system with democratic elections, when it comes to really important issues, your leaders must follow orders from the Kremlin. We don't know why exactly, but this agreement changed abruptly a few months ago. Here's a quick timeline of events. After the Victory Day parade on May 9th, Vladimir Putin and then South Ossetian President Alen Gagloyev signed a new treaty between Russia and South Ossetia. South Ossetia's media covered the treaty extensively, but only described it as an agreement to further integration. The day after the treaty was ratified, an obscure Russian publication published this article promoting one Marat Kambolov as the Kremlin's choice to become the next president of South Ossetia. This was now possible because of a clause in the treaty that South Ossetia's media hadn't mentioned in its coverage. It allows Russian citizens to hold government positions in South Ossetia without needing to first become South Ossetian citizens or meet the 10-year residency requirements for holding elected office. Then, the very next day after that article appeared, Marat Kambolov was appointed state advisor to President Gagloyev. It's not clear if Kambolov had ever even been to South Ossetia before this, but he is from North Ossetia, one of the reasons he was described as a good fit in that article. That appointment had just happened when I was making my last video on South Ossetia, and I predicted, with complete confidence that this was a sign that Kambolov was going to become president of South Ossetia in about a year at the next presidential elections in May 2027. And I was so wrong about this. Here's what happened next. On the 8th of June, which was the day before my video was published and too late to make an update, South Ossetian Prime Minister Kambolov Tatayev met with President Gagloyev during a cabinet meeting and submitted his resignation. Without missing a beat, Gagloyev accepted it and, in the same meeting, announced his nomination to replace Tatayev, Marat Kambolov. Now then, it turns out there is no requirement in the South Ossetian Constitution that to become prime minister, you have to be a member of parliament, which is good because Kambolov definitely isn't one. But to become prime minister, you do have to have the consent of parliament. And this happened 8 days later. So, 3 weeks after arriving in South Ossetia, a country where he knew no one and no one knew him, Kambolov became prime minister. At this point, he appeared to be in the perfect position to become president at the next election, which was less than a year away. But why wait? Okay, this next part I really wasn't expecting. On June 23rd, Vladimir Putin announced he was appointing President Alan Gagloyev of South Ossetia to be one of his official advisors. To advise Putin on what exactly? According to Gagloyev's own statement, he will be advising him on the implementation of the treaty they both signed on the 9th of May. Russia seems to be implementing this treaty just fine without Gagloyev's help, but anyway, taking up this important new position meant that Gagloyev had to resign the presidency and move to take up a cushy new life in Moscow. And what happens according to the Constitution of South Ossetia if the president resigns? It just so happens that the person who becomes acting president is the prime minister. And so, just like that, this immigrant from Russia took control of a country he just arrived in. And from the very moment that Kambolov became acting president, he hit the ground running. One of the first things he did on his first full day in office really set the tone. The main border crossing into and out of South Ossetia is the Nizhny Zaramag checkpoint, which sits at the entrance to the 3-kilometer-long Roki Tunnel and is plagued by long wait times and has long been a source of complaints by the public. In a total power move, on his first day in office, Kambolov rocked up at the checkpoint for a surprise inspection. Writing on Telegram about what he found, Kambolov said, "The situation at the border was dire. The head of the customs post wasn't there. Work was seriously disrupted. People were waiting for hours. I spoke with them. Fatigue and irritation were palpable in every conversation." When looking at the improvements underway for the checkpoint, he said, "There are no workers on site, and construction is practically at a standstill." Just look at Kambolov's body language here as he walks about. He reminds me of a new CEO, just appointed to lead a struggling company, introducing himself to everyone, making a big show of listening to low-level staff, and basically intimidating the heck out of everyone in management. As he left, he ordered the border service to, quote, "prepare concrete proposals to address the situation as soon as possible." Yikes. Sounds like someone's going to get fired. Then, at the end of his first day, acting President Kambolov attended a high school graduation ball. Because South Ossetia is so small, it appears to have been held for the entire country. Speaking to the graduates, he encouraged them to, quote, "set only the boldest goals." My favorite detail from this story is that the police arrested 8 attendees for underage driving. I find it somehow reassuring to know that high school seniors are exactly the same the world over. On his second day in office, a group of road construction workers held a protest in central Skin Valley, complaining that the government owed them money. Kambolov invited the workers in to meet with him and discovered they hadn't been paid for 9 months. He announced he was taking personal responsibility for ensuring the situation was resolved. In his Telegram post, he said he shook their toil-worn, calloused palms and said, "Behind each of them stand children and parents. Families must be fed and provided for." Later that day, the prosecutors general of Russia and South Ossetia met on the sidelines of the St. Petersburg Economic Forum and signed an agreement to deepen cooperation. I suspect this deal is designed to prevent the sort of standoff that occurred in Abkhazia earlier this year, when a Russian court in Sochi indicted a group of Abkhaz citizens but was unable to extradite them. We can't allow that sort of independence in South Ossetia, can we? On his third day in office, which was a Saturday, Russian Health Minister Mikhail Murashko arrived in town for a weekend visit, during which an agreement was reached for Russia to seriously upgrade South Ossetia's entire healthcare system. So, that's pretty good. That Saturday was also Youth Day, and Kambolov published a letter to the young people under his care, telling them, don't be afraid to set big goals. Big goals are sort of a theme here. And then, at the end of the same day, news arrived of a terrible car accident in a village near the capital city of Simbali, in which 2 people lost their lives. Kambolov issued a statement expressing condolences to the family, ordered that the situation be closely monitored, and then said, those responsible will be severely punished. No one is untouchable. So, honestly, what's not to like about Marat Kambolov? I mean, if he was running for office in my town and promised to ruthlessly tackle problems, punish wrongdoers, and supercharge the healthcare system, I'd vote for him. The problem is that the people of South Ossetia didn't vote for him. His connections, personal drive, and access to oodles of Russian cash appear set to make him a very effective leader. But let's make no mistake. It doesn't matter whether the people of South Ossetia like him or not. He's not going anywhere. South Ossetia's democracy, flawed as it has been, is finished. And the last vestiges of autonomy and self-rule in this breakaway republic have been extinguished. In exchange, so it appears, for short-term material gain. Abkhazia, Georgia's other breakaway republic, has a famous slogan: freedom is more precious than bread. Based on the events of the last few months, I think South Ossetia's slogan should be, how much for our freedom? We can give you a good price. Russia is taking direct control over South Ossetia. This much is obvious, but what's motivating this takeover is still far from clear. Let's explore 2 possible explanations. Sputnik published this surprisingly frank bit of political analysis by a researcher named Sergei Markodanov, in which he speculates that Russia's actions are motivated by trying to limit the damage South Ossetia does to its reputation. Not the damage to its reputation that comes from propping up a puppet state, but the damage that comes from it being a very badly run, very corrupt puppet state which holds open elections, in which candidates openly, and probably accurately, accuse each other of corruption. As Markodanov puts it, Russia probably wanted to somehow mitigate the potential risks of such political turbulence, and that this was necessary to prevent a possible Abkhazization. So that's pretty chilling. I don't know where you're from, but wherever I've ever lived, candidates accusing each other of corruption, often accurately, that's just a normal election. But that last line must be particularly chilling for the people of Abkhazia, to know that they're used basically as an example of the sort of thing that Russia will not allow to stand. The other main theory for what the Kremlin is up to was set out in a recent article in Meduza, the exiled Russian news site, which, despite its shameful use of the .io country code in its domain, see my video for why I say that, is generally considered reliable. The article cites several sources which indicate that Russia is planning to annex South Ossetia outright, or possibly incorporate it into the Union State, the theoretical federation that exists between Russia and Belarus, but which in reality exists mostly on paper. Upon closer examination of the Meduza article, though, the sources it cites are all from 2022, back when South Ossetia was planning to hold a referendum on unification with Russia. Those plans were dropped that same year, after the election of Alan Gagloyev, presumably at the request of the Kremlin, which had never openly backed the plan. The only recent source appears in the very last few lines of the article, and it's from an anonymous low-level functionary. Even then, It only seems to endorse the Union State plan, not outright annexation. In my last video, I expressed a lot of doubt about Russia's desire to annex South Ossetia, and I haven't changed my mind. Russia now has complete control over South Ossetia, so formal annexation doesn't have much in the way of upside. It would also totally undermine the ruling Georgian Dream Party in Georgia, which is generally viewed as somewhat pro-Russian, and has definitely taken a softer line than previous governments when it comes to South Ossetia. Most notably, in January of this year, the Georgian Dream government abolished Georgia's South Ossetia administration, a sort of government in exile for the territory in the breakaway republic. This was a major act of de-escalation by Georgia, so Russia turning around and formally annexing that territory a few months later would be a major slap in the face. So that leaves the idea of South Ossetia joining the Union State, which is probably more compelling, if not rather meaningless. Soon after it was created, both Russia and Belarus lost interest in the strong federation set out in the Union State treaties, and none of the joint institutions these treaties called for have been created. But because it doesn't really exist, the Union State concept can fairly easily be twisted to fit whatever scenario the Kremlin is cooking up. So yeah, I can see it being invoked to justify Russian dominance over this section of Georgia without the government of Georgia necessarily getting too upset about it. Personally, I think a revived Union State would do much more to damage Russia's international reputation, such as it is, than open elections in South Ossetia could possibly do, but, you know, what do I know? Thanks for watching. If you're interested in South Ossetia and other underreported parts of the world, be sure to take a moment to subscribe to this channel and to sign up for my free monthly newsletter. And I'll see you guys in the next video.